Now, I'm really happy that our colleague Ronald Lawson is here with us. He's lived and worked for many years in New York City and then moved down to North Carolina. For a brief time, while he was there, we kept encouraging him to move to Loma Linda. And he has, and we're happy for that. Some of you may be interested that he's living in the home of Valeris Caparis. And so we continue to have thoughtful people in that residence. So this is a long series. Ron has done massive research on the sociology of Adventism. He will share some of that with us. These are coming out in 4 big volumes in due course. So we get a little bit of a preview to what he's up to. And we'll have 3 in October. Then Dr. Jones will do something on phenomenology of religion, the last Sabbath in October. Then Ron will come back for the first Sabbath in November. This is a way to accommodate people's different schedules. So our series don't often run sequential, sometimes they're intermittent, but when we put them on YouTube playlists, nobody knows the difference. We can put them in chronological order there. So let's begin with prayer. Dear God, thank you for Ron. Thank you for all he's done in so many ways for our church. So many very different ways for our church. We express our gratitude for that, and we express our gratitude for his research this morning. In Christ's name, amen.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's picking up. It's good to be here. I'm writing 4 volumes, as David told you, and thank you. And I've decided that in these 4 meetings I will take a chapter, a piece from each of the 4 volumes. But today I've got to do 2 things, so I put it all on slides to keep me under control. So we finish on time. Well, hopefully. We'll see how long it takes. And so I'm laying a foundation at the beginning just to make sure that you all understand something you've probably heard of, church sect theory. And then I'm going to move on to Adventists and social issues. So here we go. By the way, I should give you my website. It is ronaldlawson.net. Nice and easy. Ronald Lawson joined together. Okay? And I put up a new paper every week, and there's now about 50 there, I suppose, maybe more. And if you are interested in seeing the papers I've written over the years and published, they're there. Okay, so I want to begin by reminding you about church sect theory, which originated with Ernst Troeltsch, a disciple of Max Weber in Europe in 1911, where the church meant the established church of the country. In 1929, in the United States, H. Richard Niebuhr, the brother of Reinhold, said there's no such church here, and that we have denominations. And the theory, in effect, became sect denomination theory, how sects move on to become denominations over time. But we still call it church sect theory. The key variable in describing the difference between a sect and a denomination is, quote, the degree to which a religious group is in a state of tension with its surrounding socio-cultural environment. So degree of tension. And there's a continuum from sect to denomination. And there are 3 different pointers to that. They were different, the sects are different from other groups in society. They are separate from society, and this mutual antagonism between them and society, government, and other relevant established groups, often other religious groups. Early Adventism was in high tension with society, other churches, and government. It was highly sectarian. We had a different lifestyle. We rejected the American dream because we thought Christ was coming very soon. We tried to observe the Sabbath when people were working 6 days a week. We had diet prohibitions which made it difficult to eat socially with other people. We rejected most of popular culture, rejected much of medicine as it was then practiced, and adopted a plain dress code for women members. That's just some of them. We were separated because we had such close ties among ourselves. The lives of early Adventists were centered around their church, its mission, its subculture. They were separated to the extent that they could go to church-run schools, and they tended to live around and work at church institutions, which we came to call Adventist ghettos. I've never lived in an Adventist ghetto before. It's a good experience. And then there was mutual antagonism towards and from other churches. They were God's remnant people. They were the special ones. They were the bearers of God's last warning message. Other Protestants were apostate and the whore of Babylon. The Catholic Church was the persecuting beast. Their aggressive evangelism challenged other pastors to come up with a text in the New Testament changing from the Sabbath to Sunday, and they expected persecution. These were good reasons to have tension with other religious groups. We had tensions with the state. Early Adventists identified the US as the second beast of Revelation 13. Some of our farmer members were arrested for working on Sundays for breaking state blue laws. Tension increased during the Civil War when they endorsed pacifism, declaring their members would not serve, and they disfellowshipped members who served. Oops, I think I'm turning 2 pages. But with time, tension gradually subsided. As Adventism grew and spread rapidly. For example, the attempt to pass a Sunday law in Congress should have indicated that Christ was about to return. This was what they were waiting for. But instead, they chose to oppose the Sunday law in order to extend the time for them to evangelize. They declared that the US government was still lamb-like. After all, that was a big change from the US government being the beast. Our institutions were originally established to help keep Adventists separate, and they were also vehicles to promote their special message, but these became key vehicles in tension reduction. As they chose to seek accreditation for the College of Medical Evangelists, and then for other colleges, their faculty were exposed to higher education and new ideas, and their young members used the degrees obtained to achieve upward mobility. They no longer went there just to work for the church. As their sanitariums became hospitals, the medicine they practiced became much less different. When World War I broke out, Adventists in the English-speaking world exchanged their previous pacifism for non-combatancy, which allowed them to express their patriotism while not killing. So they became much less different once we get to World War I. In other countries, in Europe, notably Germany, but also in Latin America, Adventists actually became combatants, and so they were less different still. This trajectory has continued since that time. There have been attempts to slow it, for example, by General Conference Presidents Robert Pearson and now by Ted Wilson, but it has continued inexorably and pretty much universally. Let's look at some indicators of reduced tension. Adventists became not conscientious objectors, but conscientious cooperators, as the review declared, in World War II, and this continued on into the Korean War. Those facing the draft were trained for military service in medical units on Adventist campuses, where the teachers were military officers. The military made provision for separate basic training for non-combatants and I realised today I didn't know how this was pronounced. Is it Fort Sam Houston or Fort Sam Houston? It's Houston, is it?
Houston.
Okay. See, I lived in New York, where we have a Houston Street. Adventist pastors had the choice of becoming military chaplains from the Korean War onwards, where some rose to the highest ranks. Church leaders were thrilled when it was suggested that Adventist draftees become the source of recruits for the ranks of Operation Whitecoat. Adventists gradually became more comfortable with the government and with society. The 5-day week made finding a job or a career less of a problem for members. The church successfully used court cases to reduce problems for its members. ADRA, funded largely by USAID, did good and won accolades. The Adventist public relations apparatus has been able to damp down potential disasters, such as that over the Branch Davidian fiasco. Adventism accepted a corporate model for itself, headquartered in a corporate park with the president who became the church's CEO. Church leaders chose to trademark the church's name and used the legal system to distance itself from schismatic groups and organizations that it disapproved of. They became increasingly comfortable with other churches also. There were the evangelical conferences in the 1950s, at the end of which the evangelicals declared that we were evangelicals. They had discussions with a great number of religious groups since that time, in particular the Lutherans, the Presbyterians. They've taken observer status at the National Council of Churches. In Germany, they became active members of the ecumenical organization there. Pastors are increasingly active in local ministers' fraternal organizations, and beginning with Porter Care hospitals in Colorado, Adventists have joined with Catholic hospitals to create a single system in several locations. So pulling this together, Adventism has become less peculiar, less separate, and increasingly more comfortable with the social and political environment. It has moved a considerable distance along the sect denomination continuum without yet becoming a full-fledged denomination. Now that was what I have been reminding you of. I assume that many of you have heard of church sect theory, and that is a very brief reminder of what it's about. If you're interested in reading more about that, I have a paper on my website which is about church sect theory and how it applies to Adventism. So it's there in much greater detail than I said today. So my application of church sect theory to Adventism is akin to how other sociologists have explored the evolution of other religious groups. I have recently used that theory in a new way to explore how 4 American-born religious groups, the Mormons, Adventists, Witnesses, and Pentecostals, have related to social issues. I will now shift our focus to Adventists and social issues, which is what I set out to do. So in this presentation, I'm presenting you the opening salvo on the second volume that I'm writing, which is about Adventists and social issues. The thesis that I'm arguing is this: while a sectarian group has high tension with society, this gives it, so in other words, while it's a sect, this gives it the freedom to ignore prevailing social mores in areas where this is important to its mission, and to adopt radical stances. However, as its tension with society drops and it begins to move towards denominationalism, it then confronts a conformist, conservative stance which it clings to long after the mainline denominations have begun to modify their positions. So we will see how in some key social issue areas, which were key to our mission as we saw it, We adopted initially a very radical stance compared with society. We did not care what others thought about us. But as we became more comfortable with society, we became more willing to, we wanted to be more regular. We wanted the conservative churches to admire us. And so we became more conformist in the positions that we adopted. In other areas which were not seen as so important to our mission, its initial stance is usually conformist, especially when instances among members would likely cause embarrassment. I'll give you examples of this. Once the mainline denominations begin to modify their stances, sectarian groups tend to value their conformist stances more highly, so that they then cling to them long after the mainline has changed its position. Note, as a sect feels pressure to modernize its stance on social norms, some leaders and members fear that changes could cause it to lose its distinctiveness. The internal struggle over this issue raises the possibility of a response that leads the group to increase its tension with the environment, thus reversing the usual trajectory from sect towards denomination. If you can move one way, you can also move the other way, you know. Armin Maus, for example, the Mormon historical sociologist, a really good academic, has argued that this had happened to the Mormons from between 1950 and about 1990. And more recently, Stark and Finke, in a book and article, have added this possibility to their theory. So let's consider the Adventist data. Initially, we were radical in 4 areas. First of all, women in ministry. In a time when very few churches at all had women pastors or priests, we had a woman prophet. We had women pastors. We had women evangelists. We were willing to say all hands on deck. It doesn't matter about your gender, because we're needing to get our mission done so that Jesus can come. In matters of race, once we started to pay attention to the blacks in the South, we created integrated Southern churches. No wonder, given I've lived in the South now, and there's still considerable racism there. No wonder that our churches had stones thrown at them. It was just simply a radical position to adopt at that time. In Latin America in particular, where divorce was not legal in many countries, but where marriages still failed, and people then started to live with a new person who they could not marry, we accepted the existing relationship as if it was a legal marriage. The Catholics said we were favouring marriage breakup, but we were taking the existing Adventist family relation unit and saying, you are Adventist, married or not. And then we come to polygamy. In the main churches, the main mission churches in Africa, for example, they insisted that a male convert get rid of all but one of his wives in order to become a member of their church. But in 1920, Branson, who was then the leader of the church in Africa, said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to accept the existing family unit, even if it includes many wives. They can all be Adventists. They just simply cannot add any more wives. Now, this was an important decision because in order to, if a man was going to get rid of his wife in a patrilineal society, and most of the societies in Africa are patrilineal, the woman leaves her kin group and comes to the man's kin group. and the children and the wife belong to the kinship group of the man. If the man sends the wife away, she's sent away from her children, she doesn't have a kinship group, and she often had to end up prostituting herself in order to eat. It was a social calamitous situation. And that's what the other churches were doing. We said, no, we're not going to do that. But as we became more comfortable with society, we became more conformist, especially to the conservative positions. So that after Ellen White died, for example, the number of women pastors just gradually went off until, when I was a kid, there were none. Perhaps the leader of the children in the conference would be a woman, and that was it.
Ron, could you hold the mic a little, please?
Is that better? Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. But if I drop, let me know. It was not too long, because of the tensions that emerged in the South. It was even during Ellen White's last years that she said, okay, we can separate the races in congregations. And then much later, after blacks had not had opportunities to rise in the church to leadership positions, and they were asking for being able to hold positions in the conferences, the response was, no, we can't let a black leader be over white pastors. So we'll send you off to be separate conferences. So we established separate racially based conferences after the Methodists had stopped doing it. In polygamy, in the 1930s, we changed our rules and became just like the Anglicans and the other mission churches in Africa. We wanted to be seen as promoting the Eden view of marriage. There was no pressure except from the government to switch on the previously divorced or failed marriages in Latin America, however. Eventually, as other churches began to modernize and started to change their position on these social issues, Adventism proved slow to change. For example, yes, we did, after the women's movement in the 1970s, start to provide scholarships for women to go to seminary, and they could become associate pastors usually. But there was no ordination. This became controversial almost immediately. So the position of women was left unequal.
Ron, hold it closer, please.
Sorry, thank you.
There you go.
My hand's crossed.
Can't you clip it, Ron?
And it's not. It doesn't pick up there. In the black conferences, the blacks had gained considerably from having control of their own work. The work among the African Americans, and then as the immigrants came in from the West Indies, blossomed and grew larger and larger. And it was the regional conferences became, I think, the main stumbling block to having unified conferences. For reasons that I think are very easy to understand. When I was in Africa, I've been to 60 countries and all the divisions, I met younger pastors who were pressing for change on polygamy. They said this is just simply unchristian. Polygamy is becoming less common as the countries there urbanize. But there's still a lot of polygamy, and the stain problems occurred that I described. And the younger, better educated pastors want that to change. But the leaders said to me, we have had only, I'm a big man, I'm a president. I should be able to show that I've got several wives. That's the way you show you're a big man. But I've had only one wife. And if I've had only one wife, we can have only people with one wife in the church. Now let's come to the other social issues, a bunch of them, where we didn't see the issues as being important to our mission. And indeed, it would be embarrassing if we had such instances in our midst. So we said these are not our issue, and we accepted the position in conservative society. So, for example, divorce was not an Adventist issue. Adventists didn't get divorced. There was no physical or sexual abuse in the church. It's not our issue, we said. And of course there's no gays and lesbians in our church. That's not our issue. We did occasionally have some out of wedlock births. And we dealt with them with acute embarrassment. Cohabitation didn't happen among Adventists. And later, when HIV first struck the gay community in North America, that was God's punishment. It was not our issue. As society became more accepting or more aware of these issues, as our tension with society was decreasing, these issues became clearly our issues, but we remained very conservative with them. You could only officially have a divorce if one party committed adultery. So if couples separated, they waited eagerly for the other party to fall in love, so that party could become the guilty party. Among LGBTs, we supported CURE program, Homosexuals Anonymous, Quest Learning Centre. Out of wedlock births became less common as abortion became legal in the United States. There were lots of abortions in the white church, apparently. There were far fewer out of wedlock births there. But the black church had a lot of such births, but you had to lose your membership and then be rebaptized after you delivered. That was the way it was done. Once HIV became global, affecting Africa in particular, I was told by Bekele Hay, when he was president of the East Africa Division, it's not our issue. Our people don't get AIDS. We're sexually not promiscuous. That wasn't true, not at all. Cohabitation was happening in society, was happening among some Adventists, but we didn't recognize it. And again, we did not admit yet that we had sexual and physical abuse in the church. These are still not our issues. We were trying to maintain a good front. As the mainline churches liberalised their positions, the sectarian groups lowered their tensions with society, but they felt pressure, therefore, to change, both internal and external. People wanted the church to change, but they were slow to do so. So, for example, we did allow through a sleight of hand when it came to the votes at the GC session in 2000 in Toronto. Remember, the report was turned down in the big debate early in the week. And on the last day, on the Friday, lots of the delegates went shopping in Toronto. And there was a call for a new vote. And some considerable changes were made in divorce because people from the developing world were not there in large numbers. When it comes to LGBT, we are still supporting and taking to conferences as our examples a few people who claim that they have changed. There's much growing sympathy and understanding within the church ranks and among many pastors and teachers, but the official position remains as conservative as it has always been. Concerning out of wedlock births, the churches vary. I've noticed black churches vary. Some of them still insist that the pregnant woman resign and after she's delivered can be rebaptized. That's if she still wants to be. She's more likely to take offense at that and not come back these days. But there's a gradual shift in churches and what they're actually doing there. We became very supportive of HIV in Africa. This was after Harvey Elder, Dr. Harvey Elder, who really played an enormous role in this, persuaded Robert Falkenberg that there were so many pastors and indeed administrators with HIV that it was going to cost the church an absolute mint in medical and other costs, people being paid while they were sick. And so we changed our position. But we have never changed our position in the United States because we continue to see it as a gay disease here. Not true, of course, it's mixed thoroughly. Cohabitation is still a no-no in most places. But when I was in the Netherlands, I was taken to a camp, a youth camp, where there's different rooms for people, for the young people to stay in. And there are some that were built for the husbands and wives, the young marrieds, so they can be together. And they told me point blank, we also let the couples that are living together stay together when they come to a youth camp. And the same we do the same for the gay couples. And the gay and lesbian couples, we let them do that, and to them stay together. Because we figure that, especially the heterosexual couples, but they're very positive about the gay and lesbians too. We figure that they will stay in the church, the heterosexual couples will marry, and now the gay couples can marry, and that they will then become pillars in the church. Whereas if we don't let them stay together, they'll leave the church in disgust. We've come to recognize that abuse is a real Adventist problem. It's a huge Adventist problem. It's a huge problem in all conservative churches, both physical and sexual. And we have programs to help now. But it's still occurring, and we're very reluctant to admit that it really is a big Adventist issue. Okay, so that's my summary, and I did finish in good time. So now it's over to you.
Okay, who has the first question or comment?
Can we have a round of applause for the very...
Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for this review and analysis. But it's interesting to me, and I don't quite understand why, that when we were actually on the more sectarian end of the spectrum, we were actually more, should we say, progressive on at least two particular issues of women and polygamy. How do you explain that?
Well, the church sect theory explains it very well. In other words, when you're so sectarian that you know that you're different and you thumb your nose at the rest of society, then you do something to help your mission. And that's what really matters, to help your mission. And so you've got room to be radical if it's important to your mission. And it was important to have all hands on deck as pastors. It was important to have to be able to baptize families where they were not officially married in Latin America. It was important initially. It didn't occur to us that we would separate when everybody's God's child. We're baptizing African Americans. Of course, they're going to be in church with everybody else until you get pelted with stones. Polygamy, I mean, obviously it was a total disaster. Later, we're prepared to accept that disaster. But initially, no, we were going to stand out. And we really stood out, and the other churches didn't like it one bit.
So essentially, we've lost our mission, is what you're saying.
I have a question. Regarding polygamy, how do the women themselves view that? Do they embrace it? Yes, our husband's a big man and he needs lots of wives. Or are they like American women who feel it's an issue?
I cannot say too much, but polygamy is a rule. It's a land-owning thing where the women and the children do the work on the farm, right? And I found it really fascinating, and I forgot to mention this. The rule is the man cannot be baptized because he's got multiple wives. But the wives can be baptized because they've only got one husband. And that is the rule. The man who's the one with the money, he's the wealthy man. His wives are the sign of that. He can't be baptized. We're cutting off our nose to spite our faith in this matter. All he can do is to go and be a Sabbath School class member, sit there and not hold an important position in the church at all, not be baptized, not be sure that he's going to be saved at all.
Is this though part of the problem with the South allowing women to be ordinated in their conferences? Is that they don't want their own women to become like American women?
There's always two sides to this, right? Part of it is that we want to be legalistic about what does the Bible say, and part of it is our glasses are made for us by our society. So what we see the Bible saying is what our society allows us to see, and clearly that's at work there. Ron.
Two unrelated questions. Number one, back in the 70s, you know, the church was officially supporting a gay conversion therapy thing out in Pennsylvania. The leader turned out to be molesting his patients, as it were. Does the church anywhere officially support any of these formal gay conversion programs? That's one question. The other question is, how does church sect theory relate to a worldwide church that votes we cannot and will not ordain women, and a Pacific Union that just goes right on ahead doing it?
Okay, the first one, I've forgotten what your first question was.
Official support of gay conversion
yes.
therapies.
We no longer have our own conversion therapy. I should admit that I was the person in my research who found out what was happening at the Quest Learning Centre. I interviewed 14 people who'd been through the program and discovered that 13 of them had all been molested. And the 14th was older, and presumably not attractive, but he'd been misused financially. He'd been asked for money, for loans, and he felt he couldn't say no, because of the relationship. Those were the worst interviews I've ever done. They were just incredibly sad. They went there with such hope. The good thing that happened is that some of them fell in love with other members there, with other people at the program. We got our fingers burnt by that. I decided that it was a very difficult decision for me, because I had to blow the whistle, and yet here was I at the very beginning of my study. I didn't want to be blackballed, but I felt that I had to stop what was happening. So I wrote a letter to Neil Wilson and sent a copy of the letter to 30 other people of high standing in the church, so that he couldn't put it in the drawer. And within days, the man concerned resigned. And admitted what he'd done. We got our fingers burnt from that, and we haven't, as a church, sponsored a conversion therapy again. But we continue to talk about that as if it's the answer, and it absolutely isn't. It's the other cases are not around the world, especially in America, because they're the ones who I know, which I know the best. Are not doing so much in the way of sexual contact between the leaders. Sometimes the leader will fall in love with one of the people, and the two will go off together, and the group will collapse. That's happened several times. But they're just simply not successful. The stories of broken promises and sad outcomes. But we continue to wave that as the flag, the answer, because what else can we do? If we don't accept people the way they were made, we've got to come up with a solution. Otherwise, what do we stand for? And so we take around people who claim to be changed, and there's 4 or 5 of them in one group. They're the ones who are the token gay and lesbian advocates who are taken to speak. And all of them have got really sad backgrounds, and their view of what it's like to have they don't talk in terms of relationships. They talk in terms of promiscuity, because that's what they're promiscuity and drugs. It's a very sad story that we are trumpeting as the typical gay and lesbian story. It's not true.
Okay, is the Pacific Union a sect, or is the General Conference a sect on ordination of women? The Pacific Union ordains, and the World Church says, no, you can't do that. Well, yes, we can.
The Pacific Union is becoming more denominational. In other words, our church is anything but the same around the world, right? I mean, I can tell you, in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be talking about a particular issue about Adventism and animism. And you'll see what I mean. We're a very diverse church.
Yeah, thank you, Ron, for years of intensive and insightful research. This is really interesting and helpful. Today, you have appropriately focused, of course, on our own denominational history and as a culture. With a very broad brush now, perhaps with reference to some of the 6 reference points that you've been working through, is there anything you'd like to say about Adventism alongside the other sectarian groups? Pro or con, contrast, compare?
Okay, John. Good question. The witnesses, of course, are utterly sectarian still. For a start, they lose so many people. It sort of renews itself with each generation. So they're all mostly new converts. We've got a lot of that too, of course. And it helps to keep it somewhat sectarian. But in the witness case, it's much more so. I've never seen a church so successfully alienates its youth as the witnesses. So on all these issues, they're pretending that they're not their issues still. But they have huge abuse problems, for example, huge. And the gay ex-witnesses find each other, but they don't find each other while they're witnesses because they can't admit anything. So they can't find it. It's the ex-gays that you can find ex-witness gay organisations. Mormons, they're so keen on family values. I mean, that's what they, after having been polygamous, they're the foundation of the American family values conservative style. They find it really difficult with some of these issues. But again, the statistics indicate huge abuse problems, huge. And they've got a gay and lesbian cadre, which is not, many of them left, but some of them are still Mormons. So they're fairly similar in that respect to Adventists. The Pentecostals, they're a totally different situation because I ended up doing most of my study, when it came to social issues, yes, I included the Pentecostals. But for example, and what I will be showing you next week, where I will be comparing the growth and where groups grow and how much they've grown. Mormons, Adventists, witnesses. I call them the Moore groups. All of them are centrally organised, and so you can get statistics and so forth from them. But the Pentecostals, everything is the other way round. So they're fragmented, and they continue to fragment denominationally. So to get information, and some of them are much more conservative, some of them are becoming, the Assembly of God, for example, is certainly on its way to becoming a denomination. But there's always small sectarian groups galore around the world of Pentecostals.
Thank you.
Right here.
Thank you, Ron. As a sociologist, might you predict how much longer Adventism can be one global denomination? It seems to me that the stresses and strains are so intense that we need to reconsider that. There are a couple of hundred Reformed congregations, that many Lutheran congregations, that many Wesleyan ones around the world. The cultural tensions in those groups have become so great that they have given up what we're still trying to do.
And the Methodists are just about to do it.
That's right. And people in those other denominations with whom I have spoken marvel that we're even still trying. They believe that these cultural differences are so deep and so wide that too much of their time was being consumed by trying to negotiate those matters. When I think about the fall councils that have happened since the last general conference, every one of them has been beset by this sort of problems, and the minute it might appear that this fall it would not be, the administration introduces the issue of abortion almost as though deliberately to foster this kind of tension between the different cultures. So I think the time may come in the not too distant future to transform our one denomination into 13 corresponding to the divisions. I wonder what you think.
Okay, I can give that's a really excellent question, and I want to take it on two ways. Let's look at the ordination of women around the world. I was in Australia in 1999 and did extensive interviews in Australia and New Zealand and some of the Pacific Islands. I was told at Fox Valley Road, in the division headquarters, that we couldn't support ordination of women because the New Guineans would be so upset. I got to New Guinea and was told, if the brethren say to ordain women, we'll do it. It was a totally different attitude from what I was told to expect. And of course now they're doing it. I mean, they got women pastors in New Guinea. And the division realised this, and the division is now pro-ordination. I've been in Zimbabwe. They've had women pastors. In Peru, I interviewed a woman pastor. In El Salvador, I interviewed a woman who was head of the education department in the conference, etc. I mean, there's much more. What I think is going on is that the leadership is rather like what they are on polygamy. That we had to do without, so we're going to do without. Or we had to do without women pastors, and we're going to do without women pastors. The leadership is much more conservative than the membership. The membership will do. Well, if the big man says to do it, they will get used to it. What I think we need as a church is a third world president of the General Conference who becomes a symbol of our unity but has no control. And much more diversity allowed in different divisions.
Okay, I have a,
Donna, this will have to be the last one.
okay, first, just an observation. Something that especially the women here, but all of us will remember, is that when, regarding out-of-wedlock births, that when an Adventist student or woman did become pregnant out of wedlock, it was she who was out of the camp, so to speak. That happened, I can think of instances at Keene when I was at school there, and at La Sierra when I was at school there. So that was one, and the problem, or part of the problem, was that because the church was so firm on abstinence, then no birth control, because that would be planning to do something wrong. So therefore one got pregnant and then one was out of the loop. Or, and I think this has happened, although we don't know it, there's an increase then in abortions, to early abortions once they're legal, because they become a way out, a way to avoid the stigma. But the other thing I had is kind of a broad question. How will we know when we've moved all the way on that spectrum that you began at the beginning? When will we be a denomination? Even though we call ourselves that, but what's the dispositive point? What will make it so?
Thank you, Donna. Observation on your observation. You're absolutely right. I mean, we assume that the woman has become pregnant to a non-Adventist man. It's always the woman who gets the discipline when she's pregnant. And you're right about the birth control. You know, when AIDS came to America, it really affected gay Adventists because they were not expecting to have sex. And things can get out of hand, you know. The kinship has got banners with people's names on them, memorializing them, sort of like the AIDS quilt. They just simply stopped because so many people were dying. The same sort of thing, the assumption that we're not going to do it. There. I think that it is certain doctrines that are which some of us find embarrassing. The ones which make us peculiar is the group, the remnant, for example. Okay, that we alone have the message that you've got to become an Adventist and keep the Sabbath and keep it on the way to heaven if you haven't otherwise. Now, not quite sure how that can happen physically, but it's these doctrines which continue to keep us separated to some extent. I'm not against sectarianism. It helps us be more healthy, after all, right? being separate in that respect. Being separate, it's not terrible as long as it's got some negative stuff. If it makes us proud of who we are and so separate that we're useless. But I don't really want us to go all the way and become sort of like the Anglican Communion, which has got so much diversity, and each congregation is so different from the next one. But that's the way we're heading.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to cut you off now. Another round of applause. We'll be here next week.
Yes.
And what, for 4 weeks altogether, is that? Okay, so we're looking forward to that. And your website again is?
www.ronaldlawson.net. Nice and easy.
All right. Thank you very much.
Next week, it's the growth of Adventism compared to Mormons and witnesses over time. The week after, Adventists, and so that's next week is the third volume. The fourth, the next week is on Adventist and Animism, which is the fourth volume. And in the last week, the first week in November, it will be on Adventist and Government, which is a chapter in the first book. And again, we'll show you how we've gone from sect to denomination.
Well, thank you very much. We have, if you're not getting our emails, we have a list down here. And at this time, we'll have our benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.